Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Technology has always sparked our imagination by making many aspects of our lives simpler and more manageable. Of course, our reliance or over-reliance on technology has its problems as well. From the lost time scrolling endlessly to loads of misinformation, it seems it's sometimes hard to see just what the benefits are. Add to that, advances in AI are so fast and furious that the laws can't keep up, and we have a situation that raises cause for concern. In Containing Big Tech, How to Protect Our Civil Rights, Economy, and Democracy, author, Silicon Valley-based CEO, and policy expert Tom Kemp addresses all of the ways, many without our knowledge, that big business controls many aspects of our lives and offers some strategies of what can be done to minimize the impact of technology. Let's welcome Tom Kemp to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, Kevin.
Let me ask you quickly, what actually prompted you to write this book? I know you're a policy advocate in a lot of different ways, and you're working in Silicon Valley, but what prompted you to write this particular book?
I felt that I had some unique experiences of being here in Silicon Valley, starting companies, competing with the big tech players, with the companies, and sometimes even partnering with them. And then also being a CEO of a cybersecurity company and just seeing the mass amounts of data that's being collected on each and every one of us, and some of the negative consequences associated with that data leaking out or being weaponized. And so what I wanted to do is put together kind of all my experiences and put forth a book that explains what's happening with the big tech players, how our data is being collected, really look at AI and see how AI processes that data and what the tech players are doing, and put it all together and not only say, here are some of the issues, but also try to put forth some solutions for individuals, for parents, but also for policymakers as well.
And I want to get into that discussion about what parents can do with their children in a moment. But anyone pretty much who uses social media, they kind of understand that the more they use it, there's an algorithm that's written that finds out what their interests are. And then they just start seeing all these ads that are, you almost think about a product and now you see ads for the product on all of your social media feeds. And you go into a store and you buy something. Next thing you know, you're on the internet and that's all you see, pop-up ads for very similar things to that nature. So we're kind of familiar with how technology has almost dictates our thought process. But you mentioned just a moment ago that big business is looking to weaponize this information. Explain to us exactly how that looks.
Yeah, basically, the tech companies are advertising companies for the most part, right? Probably with the exception of Apple that sells products. But if you look at Google and Meta is the owner of Facebook and Instagram, that the vast majority of their revenue is advertising. And the way that they provide that advertising is they offer us free services, which we utilize. And the trade-off that we have for the free services is they collect a lot of information about us. And what historically has happened is that, to your point, we were served ads. So if one of your kids is interested in red shoes and you're shopping for red shoes, as you said before, the red shoes follows you around for weeks on each and every website. And that was how the data collection, what's known as behavioral advertising, has historically worked. But what we've seen over the last few years is that this data can be used against people. And, right now we're in a situation where things that were legal before are now illegal in certain states, specifically reproductive rights and abortion. And so therefore people Googling or going to abortion clinics, et cetera, that in some states that's now illegal, and that was historically been legal. We also have an issue, it's come to the forefront, trans, LGBTQ, et cetera. So the data that people generate as they try to figure out who they are, or maybe they look for treatments, et cetera, again, can be used by other groups, other individuals. And then the last thing I'm going to say is that, if you're being targeted as, say, a young woman with young children to be maybe served diaper ads, that people have actually found a way to use that and actually exclude you from seeing the ads for housing, for loans, et cetera. So as much as you can target someone to, say, sell them diapers or sell them kids' clothes, there may be people that say, no, actually, I don't want young women with children to be in my rental unit, so I'm going to exclude them. So this data can actually be flipped around and used against people for digital redlining and discrimination.
Wow. Now, I think that's something that I'm sure a lot of people, especially some of my listeners, probably didn't even think about, that you're doing these very innocent searches and just for research purposes or whatever the reasons are, or you're getting targeted by a particular ad group because of your buying tendencies. And now that can be used against you in order for housing, for loans, for a lot of other things that we need to survive.
Yeah. For example, if you have a health condition like dementia or depression, et cetera, that the fact that you're Googling that yes, there may be people that want to target you to sell you medicine associated with those conditions. But now people know that you are looking for the word depression or suicide, right? And someone may say, actually, I don't want to show ads to someone for my financial product that's suicidal, right? I mean, that's
right.
That's very possible. Or so. Unfortunately, what's happening is that there's just this over collection of information. And it's just not healthy to have this information being sloshed around. Now, someone may argue and say, well, wait a minute, like people are not going to purposely discriminate against people. Okay. But the problem is the data is being collected, right? And therefore, most of these companies have and will be hacked, right?
Yep.
And so even if it's not you're being served or not served being ads, the fact is that someone has a dossier that you've searched for Adderall or depression or dementia or bedwetting, et cetera, right? And so that information in the hands of wrong people, if it gets hacked, could actually be used for blackmail purposes, et cetera. So we fundamentally have a problem in which our data is being over-collected. And take into account this data is now being fed into AI to get to that personalization that you talked about before. And that can lead people down rabbit holes where they're only served or see content that is based on their personal information. And that could actually be negative if you, for 1 second, you watch a violent video and all of a sudden now your kids are being served multiple violent videos.
Now, I'm going to expand on what you just spoke about right there, because I want to get into the whole aspect of how our students are being impacted. And because there's a stat in the book that states that 75% of the top 12 most popular social media platforms use AI to recommend children's profiles to strangers. How is this even possible when we have all of these various safeguards that are supposed to be in place?
Well, there is a movement afoot in the United States and internationally to actually force the providers of online services to actually, if their products are going to be or likely to be used by kids, to design the products differently than for adults. We've done this in the physical world. And it's interesting. You may say, oh, how is this actually possible? But as I talk about in my book, just recently, Meta, who is the makers of Instagram, which probably most of people's kids have an Instagram account, in the fall of 2020, They were fined over 400 million euros, which is 400, say, we'll call it 425 in US dollars, $425 million for making children's Instagram accounts public by default. Okay. Okay. So the problem that we have is that, that by drawing attention to this, there's actually been some changes, but it's not across the board. For example, this is just what's happened in the last year or so. I'm just going to read off some things that now Google, YouTube turns off autoplay for under 18s and has turned on default break and bedtime reminders. Before, for young kids, Google, YouTube would continuously autoplay videos, right? There was no breaks. Another thing was that they have now, TikTok has now turned off push notifications after 9 p.m. for children aged 13 to 15 and after 10 p.m. to 16 to 17 years old, which means that up till recently, that if your kids had a TikTok account, maybe like a year ago, they were getting pummeled with notifications at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And of course, we know that there's a huge FOMO, fear of missing out, that if you don't immediately like or respond, et cetera. So the fundamental problem that we have multiple problems here. The first problem is that in the United States, we do not ban the collection of behavioral data for children, right? And so we treat children just like we do adults, and that can gather up sensitive information about kids who are trying to discover who they are, right? And that means doing a lot of searches, like, am I gay? Right. Or do I like, this type of book, et cetera. And then now that there's a dossier about that, right? And we no longer have the discovery. And then the second thing is that we have the technology providers are trying to make their platforms as addictive as possible. So there's more people that gather. They're trying to add more users. And so by default, they have profiles being public, right? They have notifications happening all the time. Now, again, in the last year or so, because they've been fined hundreds of millions of dollars, they are now actually dialing back, having the profiles being public, et cetera. But there's still other issues such as continuous autoplay, that there's no breaks. When you're watching TikTok and all of a sudden your kids at 3 o'clock in the morning, they all of a sudden, if you walk into the room, they've been on TikTok for 6 hours.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big problem when there's just no breaks. So there's just this incessant driving of content, whether it's good content or not, is relevant. It becomes incessant that they're just being bombarded. Their young brains are being bombarded with all of this information that a lot of it is useless information to them. It's just, again, they're just being overloaded with a lot of these things.
Yeah. So basically what happens is, as you interact, say, with TikTok, that the average video is about 20 seconds, right? And so if you're on for an hour, you can just do the multiplication of the number of videos that you've actually watched. But everything that you do in terms of your interaction with the video, you fast forward, you skip, you like, you comment, et cetera. Those are what are known as microsignals. And what happens is those microsignals are basically fed into the artificial intelligence system. And they say, oh, he fast forwarded through that cat video, but he or she really liked the dog video. So all of a sudden the dog videos, start popping up more and more and more. But the problem is that there was a study done by the Wall Street Journal just like a year or two ago where they simulated having a 13-year-old, 14-year-old on TikTok. And so they created these accounts. And pretty soon that there was hundreds of videos regarding violence, drugs, pornography, because the second one, these videos kind of get introduced, and then people are like, oh, this is interesting. Someone's smoking or someone's drinking. It continues onward. And so the fundamental issue we have, or the fundamental issues we have is that our behavioral data is being collected. And I personally think, and you're starting to move this, I think that should be banned because too much sensitive information is about being used by kids. And the second issue is that we should really require the tech companies to design the products differently for kids as opposed to adults by putting natural breaks, not having profiles be made public, et cetera.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is author, Silicon Valley-based CEO, and policy expert, Tom Kemp. To kind of deal with, you talked about how companies are being fined because of the things that they have out there. But I understand that one school district in Seattle has actually brought suit against a couple of the social media platforms because of the additional mental health professionals they had to hire due to the exploitation of the youth's brains. What we just talked about, the incessant use of the videos and things like that. And then they leads them into all these other, they may start off with a cat video, but then it ends up into pornography or something. So, but my question is, could other school districts follow suit, pardon the pun there, and start also filing these lawsuits against these big companies?
Yes, obviously in the United States, you can file a lawsuit about anything and everything. But here's and that specific school district is Seattle, right? So we're not talking about like a school district with a couple thousand. We're talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of children in the public school district of Seattle. And that lawsuit was filed against TikTok, Meta, Google, and Snap in January 2023. So it's still working its way through the legal system. I would potentially advise school districts to look up and see what the current status of that is, well, and the success, how it's going. But basically, here's the argument, right? That in the Communications Decency Act, CDA, there's something called Section 230. And what Section 230 basically says is that the websites, the platforms, are not responsible for the content, right? And so they can't be sued if people start posting crazy things on the website. The argument that these lawsuits have is that actually the algorithms amplify certain content, and therefore it goes beyond the speech aspect. It goes to that they're trying to purposely put their thumb on the scale. And so the lawsuits actually focus on claims of product liability, that these AI systems are being used to maximize engagement. And it's the actual, not the content causing the harm, it's the amplification causing harm as well. And so therefore, the tack that they're taking, it's defective product, right? It's a broken product. Just like if you went to a store and you bought a kid's toy and it had some defect that caused injury to the child, that the toy maker could be liable. And so this is the argument. They're trying to avoid this whole First Amendment, this whole content thing that you have with Section 230, and focus on the liability. And so this is being tested out right now. This is an active thing going on right now, and the school district in Seattle is leading the way on this. And so I would recommend to school districts to Google that lawsuit and see what's currently going on with that. But also I should say that there's probably about 70 or so parental lawsuits, including, very unfortunately, some kids that have passed away and the parents are blaming. And one parent, I'm just going to quote, whose 14-year-old daughter killed herself, is now suing TikTok, set of social media companies. Their goal is to get as much time from these kids on their products, but there are no safeguards. And she added, they need to change what they're feeding these children, change the algorithm so it doesn't take them into these dark places. So this is just really sad stories that I bring up here.
Yeah, no, but they're sad stories, but there is reality, because, this is the type of thing, is not as far as, and unfortunately, as far as student suicide is concerned, is nothing new, because whether it's the increase in cyberbullying, whether it's the image shaming or what have you, all those things get amplified because of the social media, because of the algorithms that do amplify these things. So the mental health of our students is at risk here. And you mentioned that now more and more parents and parent groups are also suing these companies. But what else can parents possibly do to help effect some kind of change?
So the first thing is, and by the way, I think you did a beautiful job. And depression and suicide and other really bad things, they've been pre-technology. Obviously, I think the argument is it exasperates to the social media, and the technology exasperates the problems. It's not the sole cause. So I just want to be clear as I spell out my book containing big tech, I'm not laying it all on the feet, but I'm just trying to see how it gets amplified, right? So what can parents do? So the first thing is that there's actually, what you want to do is stop the data exhaust that your kids and even yourself has, and that's being fed to the third parties. And so there are basically, and it's really scary, and I brought up in the book that it turns out that a lot of these apps, and the Washington Post said it was like 75% of even kids' apps have these third-party trackers embedded in them that collect the information. So what you want to do is, on an iPhone, there's something called app tracking transparency. You want to turn that on to block the third-party trackers from gathering the data about your kids. If you have an Android device, because Google makes it, and by default they want people being tracked, you should download a product called DuckDuckGo. It's a browser, but if you download on Android this app, it actually does the equivalent of Apple's app tracking transparency, and it blocks third-party trackers. And then on a PC, just Google EFF Privacy Badger. It's a Chrome plugin, and it blocks all the third-party trackers. And so, and let me tell you the effect of this. When Apple announced this thing called App Tracking Transparency, Meta, in its next earnings announcement, said we're going to lose $10 billion in advertising revenue because of this, right? Which means, think of the massive amounts of data that's no longer being collected and being served against your kids. So the very first thing to do is reduce the digital footprint. The second thing is, and I have a bunch of others, but I'll stop here, is you need to make sure your kids do not, as much as they want to socialize and attract, they have to set their social settings to private, because there are adults that purposely look for images and they can see that it's a kid and they will target them. And unfortunately, not all social media platforms and websites set for kids the profiles to be private. And so that is incredibly important. So those are the first two things right there.
And that's even assuming that the kid, when he signs up, uses his actual age, his real age to begin with.
Yeah.
But repeat that last one, the Chrome add-on again, the EFF.
Yeah, it's Electric Frontier Foundation. It's a nonprofit. They have something called Privacy Badger. Just type the word Privacy Badger. It's a Chrome plugin. It's like a add-on to your browser. Yep. And I would put that on your kid's browser, especially if they have a Windows system, and it blocks the third-party trackers. And you could actually see it in the upper right-hand corner. It shows you for every website you visit how many things are being blocked. Like, not wishing to pick on Huffington Post, but if you were to go to Huffington Post and have this, they have like 25 trackers of third parties. And this, obviously, it's not a kid thing, but it's just, and because all this data that they're sending to all these different third parties, and what they're gathering is your IP address and other information about you. And then if you visit another site and do something, they just it's third-party cookies. And so you leave little cookies behind about who you are. And eventually those cookies lead to the path of you. And that's how they start serving you ads. And then that starts down the whole algorithms trying to optimize, et cetera. So if you cut off the data flow of the behavioral data, then you limit the ability for you to be targeted and have their persuasive technologies try to keep you on the platform or push you in certain directions. Obviously, inside TikTok, you can't set anything like that. Once you're inside their walled garden and you're doing things, then they're going to collect it. So I want to be very clear that these suggestions inside a app for their own data gathering, I can't stop that. But I would say you got to set it to private, your social profile.
What can we do now? Because we know that these big tech corporations pretty much have a monopoly on what's going on as far as the technology is concerned. But what can we do? What can be done to help keep the development of technology in check? Because the way AI is going right now, it seems like the technology is being developed before the laws can even keep up with it. So what can we do to help keep these things in check so it doesn't get completely out of control and we don't get into this dystopian society that we see in the movies and so forth?
Well, at the end of the day, we're going to need some legislation. In California last year, and it was, oh boy, it was a big debate. We did pass in California, where I'm based, the age-appropriate design code. And what that does is actually stops the selling of kids' data and restricts data from being collected from them. It restricts the profiling. It forces the highest level of privacy settings. It turns off geolocation by default for kids. And everyone's sitting saying like, God, this is really good stuff. Like that's what we need. But unfortunately, a organization called NetChoice, which is a trade lobbying group that represents Amazon, Google, Meta, and TikTok, has sued the state of California to stop this, right? And there was an attempt to get the age-appropriate design code in Minnesota and a couple other states. And so I highly urge, especially any parents, to Google age-appropriate design code. And there may be some activity at the state level happening with like-minded parents to get something like this happening. At the federal level, there is a bill that was put forth last year. It didn't make it, but it's been reintroduced. It's the Kids Online Safety Act, and that's been reintroduced by Senators Blumenthal and Blackburn. It's very similar to the age-appropriate design code that prioritizes kids' well-being and best interests when designing their service. At the end of the day, here's the fundamental problem.
Yep.
We have decided in America to force companies that build physical products, to design them differently for kids. That's why we now have kids' car seats, right? That's why we have laws that if they're under a certain weight or under a certain age, that the car seat has to face this way or that way in the back seat, right? I think most people fully accept that you probably wouldn't want to hold a baby in your arms in the front seat. You would want to have the kid in a car seat, right? Or playground safety or lead paint. I can just go down the whole list. So we have a whole set of physical safety standards for kids that we fully accept that it's not cool to have lead paint, right? But we don't have any standards whatsoever for products that we know are going to be used by kids. And so that is the movement that is afoot right now. And so we need to push that because, yes, we can try to turn off the collection of our data, but once you're inside a walled garden like TikTok, et cetera, you can't stop it.
Well, we would certainly like to thank our guest, author of the book, Containing Big Tech, How to Protect Our Civil Rights, Economy, and Democracy, author, Silicon Valley-based CEO, and policy expert, Tom Kemp, for coming on to our show today.
Thanks for having me on.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.